Hello and welcome to The Appointment. I'm Shireen Bhan and we're in conversation with the man who's taken over the Confederation of Indian Industry, Adi Godrej. Mr. Godrej, congratulations and appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18.
Thank you. Good talking to you, Shireen.
I'm not quite sure if I should be congratulating you because you come in at a time when people are writing off the India story, when the distrust between corporate India and the government is huge, where decision-making seems to have been paralyzed and has been paralyzed for quite some time now. I don't envy you at all.
No, it is a tough situation the country is in. The GDP growth has been decelerating. The reform program has slowed down, and governance issues are not being tackled as rapidly as they should. But the opportunities are also tremendous. So the reform opportunities in front of us, if properly implemented, can take us back to a 9 to 10% growth rate very easily. For example, if you implement GST at an early date, you add 1.5 to 2 percentage points to GDP growth.
I'll come to GST in just a bit, but I understand that you led a delegation that met the Prime Minister. What does he have to say? The last couple of meetings that have happened with the Prime Minister, there's been this, come on, corporate India, don't keep giving us a hard time, don't keep painting us with the same negative brush every time you talk to the media. Was there a difference in the manner in which the Prime Minister addressed the issues?
Yes, we had a very good meeting with the Prime Minister. We started the discussion by saying that we think the reality is not as bad as the perception.
You said that you don't believe the reality is as bad as perception.
The reality is as bad as the perception, and both the government and industry, CII, needs to see to it that we do not get overly negative. It doesn't help. Perception is very important. At the same time, the government must not make moves that are perceived to be negative, that spoil the perception. For example, this retrospective amendment, GAR, etc., has been very badly perceived.
Okay.
I'm not an expert. I'm not even sure whether it ought to be so badly perceived. Clearly, it is not good for Indian economy. It's not good to attract investments into India. We should somehow find solutions to see that the perception does not get bad.
So what was the response from the Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister did say that it would be good if industry and government could work together. Now, obviously, you can't solve all the problems of the country in a 20-minute meeting, but I think he was very positive on this front. Then, of course, we also mentioned to him about the various initiatives CII is taking in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of employability.
Sure.
We also, CII is in a unique position to add value in circumstances such as this. We have about 65 offices across the country. We have regional councils, state councils. A lot of states are doing very well. Take agriculture, for example. One of the reasons why we have the inflation problem is that agricultural supply is not keeping up with agricultural demand. In some states, we have a 10% growth rate in agriculture. Benchmarking the best practices in India, spreading them around can help a lot. We have done this very successfully in many areas in the south, for example, and this is what we are going to concentrate this year. How to spread the best practices that prevail in India across India.
But coming back to the conversation with the Prime Minister, and you specifically raised the issue, for instance, of GAR and of retrospective amendment, and more than GAR, it's actually been what's happened on the retrospective amendment that seems to have soured sentiment with regards to India, in the minds of the foreign investors at least. Was there an acknowledgement on the part of the government that yes, perhaps we need to review the manner in which we've gone about this?
In our two-day conference, this came about several times. The reference to these retrospective amendments was made several times. Even the Finance Secretary mentioned in the open house that he would ensure that whatever is causing the negative perception would be addressed. I think people have realized this. Now, you can't expect an immediate response that we will do it. They will need to have an internal dialogue. I expect that before the budget is passed, most of these negatives will be removed. If they are not, we're in for a lot of trouble. And I think most people in government realize that and I'm sure will rise to the occasion.
Okay, so while there is one point of view that corporate India needs to stop talking itself into a slowdown, there's also another point of view that there has never been this kind of negativity with respect to the India story. You speak to foreign investors very often. What are they most worried about at this point in time, and what is the feedback that CII is getting from foreign investors? We've had a bunch of industry associations in the US writing to Timothy Geithner saying that raise these issues with Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee when you meet him later this week. What are you being told at this point?
Investors need certainty. Investors need a regime they can rely on. They do not want to live in a situation where 5 years down the road you find out that what you thought was X has become Y. So that clearly needs to be clarified. And these GAR provisions and many other provisions in this budget, we've had retrospective amendments in the past, but they were relatively minor. This time they're quite widespread and in much greater measure than before.
For instance, when they did the retrospective amendment which brought the special economic zone tax treatment in question, it was developers of the special economic zones who made a big hue and cry about it. Some even threatened to go to court. Some did actually go to court. But there was not this sort of backlash that we're seeing with respect to this particular retrospective amendment.
I think there is, it's not just backlash, it is a lack of credibility. And when there is a lack of credibility in the economic environment of a country, it can create a lot of harm. So I think it is very important for the government and CII to work together to see that this lack of credibility, this sentiment being so weak, is overturned.
Okay. GST, and that seems to be, a glimmer of hope on that front, at least if one goes by what Sushil Modi has come out and said. I understand that CII has played a part in getting the centre and the states to start talking at least. Are we really hopeful of a breakthrough and a resolution as far as GST is concerned? Is 2013 now a reality?
Yes, I think so. We are very hopeful. I think very clearly there was a lot of dissonance between the thinking of some of the states and the centre. And CII went and met a lot of the states. We met the opposition, tried to explain to them how important GST was and how we need to cooperate to come to some unanimity on the GST. We met the finance minister also, and asked him also to be more generous in his ability to cover the possible losses, because there aren't going to be any losses. You see, when people are worried that they're going to face losses, and when you know there are no losses, that's when you give what is known as underwriting guarantees. So I think we were able to bring the parties together. The finance minister, when he came to inaugurate our two-day session, did mention and did recognize the role CII has played in getting the parties together. I believe they had a meeting. I couldn't attend it, but Sunil Munjal from CII did attend it, and I think the movement on the GST movement forward is very strong. And you asked me,
what seems to have worked, because they've been talking for the last 2 years, more than 2 years. They haven't arrived at any kind of a consensus on compensation or the way forward. What seems to have worked this time around? Was it industry putting pressure on the state governments?
No, I don't think you could call it pressure. I think industry played a role in everybody understanding the great benefits of GST and why for small things it's not worth opposing the implementation of the GST. And I think most people have realized it's going to be a tremendously win-win solution for the country. Shirin, to my mind, it will be the biggest single reform in India after 91. It will add tremendously to our macroeconomic fundamentals, to our GDP growth rate. It will bring inflation down. It will be very consumer friendly. So overall, it's something all Indians need to work towards.
Has CII in West Bengal been given the same feedback that CII got from Gujarat and Bihar, for instance, as far as the GST is concerned?
I don't think there were some states who were more opposed to GST than others. There was also the federalism issue.
Yes.
So we generally interacted with the states where we thought the opposition was the most. And
which would include West Bengal?
No, I don't think.
Not really?
Don't think. But our state council there also must have met the finance minister. I don't know the details. But I think the opposition was more from the
BJP ruled states. And they have come on board?
I think so.
Okay. In terms of the other pending reforms, and once again we come back to this business of coalition politics, and Mamata Banerjee has made it very clear that whether it's FDI in aviation, pension reforms, insurance reforms, you know, she doesn't want to play ball with the government. Has there been any indication from the government on whether they are willing to push on any of these matters, or let things be as they are for now?
No, there's no indications, and I don't expect any indication. This is something that would be done internally. I'm sure if the senior persons in the government decide to take a certain stand, they're not going to discuss it with CII before they do take the stand. But clearly, I think persuasion is very important. I think, for example, when they brought in FDI in multi-brand retail, had it been done outside a time when Parliament was in session, it could have been done more smoothly. So I think timing is important. I think convincing allies early enough is important. I think the lesson has been learnt, and I'm sure it will be done in a smoother manner going forward.
You know, there's been a lot of talk that domestic corporates are telling the government off record that if things don't change here, we're going to take our capital and go elsewhere. Is this a real threat? Is it a false threat?
No, I wouldn't call it. I don't even believe any stories that anybody has gone and told the government that if things don't improve, we'll take our capital.
Through the back channel, we understand.
No, I think this is I've heard this on the media. I haven't really heard it from any industrialists, and there's no need to have a situation where we'll take our capital from here to there. India has the capability of investing very strongly. Indian companies have the capability investing in India and also outside India. And growing outside India is very good for the Indian economy. It creates size, scale, competitiveness in Indian companies, and I think it should be welcomed. It's not either or.
No, it's a manner of putting pressure. It's saying, get your act together, or guess what, I'm going to go elsewhere.
No, I think it's good to give suggestions to the government. It's good to help the government sort out its problems. It's good to talk up the economy, because I think we've talked down the economy more than the reality.
Is corporate India guilty of talking down the economy?
I would say we have been overly sensitive on some issues. We've had ups and downs in the past. For example, in the economic situation in the end of 2008 was quite similar. But we didn't talk it down. And also the government was very positive at that time.
So why do you believe corporate India resorted to talking down the economy as much as it did this time around? Or was it because the distrust between the government and corporate India was so large, and the fact that it became almost an adversarial position?
No, I think sometimes when one is frustrated, one gets excessively angry. It's a normal human reaction, and I think it was the anger that made people feel that corporate India was talking down the economy. We have discussed this in the CII, and we feel we shouldn't do this, and we should help the government to try and solve the problems. And in some of the states, it's worked very well. We have taken things up with the states. We are doing some benchmarking in the states. If some states can have 10% agricultural growth for 10 years in a row, and it's not just one state, why can't those practices be benchmarked into other states? So if you take the best practices in India and take them elsewhere in other states, these are practices that have been implemented in the country. We're not talking of the best practices outside.
Right.
I think India can improve dramatically, and CII will work to do that.
I want to talk to you about the investment climate and the fact that after 3 years and 13 rate hikes, we've finally seen a rate cut, and CII was very vocal about the need for a rate cut. You still believe that this is not enough to spur investment or turn the investment sentiment around. But is this going to alleviate some of the pain that we've been seeing?
This is a very good first step. Clearly, interest rates have gone up tremendously. We need to bring them down. Without more reasonable interest rates, investments will not take place easily. Returns on investments would be poor. So I do hope this is the first of several repo rate cuts. The economy needs that. And inflation has become a bit complex in that some I would say quite a bit of the inflation comes from global commodity prices,
Sure.
especially crude oil. And there's nothing you can do in Indian monetary policy to solve that issue. The rest of it comes from a supply chain deficiency. Now that must be separately attacked, and it's mainly an agricultural supply chain deficiency which we need to improve. And we have suggested to the government that investment in multi-brand retail will help resolve some of those issues. Changing the agricultural market acts will help free up agricultural marketing. See, these agricultural marketing rules were framed in the time when most agriculture was food grain.
But it's once again, it goes between the center and the state. The center says, what can we do? The state governments need to take the initiative. The states throw it back in the center's court. It's been stuck. I mean, I've covered at least 12 budgets where every time we talk about the fact that this could be the year when we'll see those reforms coming in.
That's an important role the CII can play. So we can, our state level councils, our regional councils can take these issues up with the various states, and that there's no reason why. For example, Maharashtra has recently announced that they're going to free up the marketing of agricultural produce. So a lot can be done.
Okay.
And when we met to strategize our plans for this year, this was one of the important areas we said we'd focus on.
I know you do dipstick surveys at CII the whole time. What is your own sense of CapEx at this point in time? You know, the last few months when we talk to corporates, they say it's paused, we're waiting. It could be on account of approvals, it could be on account of the fact that interest rates were very high. What's the sense that you're getting about people beginning to start spending again?
Well, investment is clearly slowed down. One of the reasons is the high cost of capital. This reduction in the repo rate is a good signal. The other is, as you rightly said, permissions are slow to come by. So obviously, even if you've taken a decision to invest in a project, if the project isn't cleared or parts of a project aren't cleared, investment won't come by. And then there are input issues. Say the power sector is seriously suffering from coal availability issues. So all three have combined to slow down investments, and that's being reflected in the lower industrial production rates.
Since you raised the issue of coal, and there is a debate at this point in time on whether it was right for the government to actually issue a presidential directive to get Coal India to sign fuel supply agreements. You've got minority shareholders saying that this is the government's way of playing big boss and it doesn't really care about minority shareholders. The government saying we're thinking about the country and the needs of the power sector, which are in need of dire reforms. How do you as an industry leader see this? And it is a tough balancing act for the government, is it not?
Yes, of course. And very clearly, I think the overall interests of the country should come first. If you have an issue on whether a company should be working in the overall interests of, in the overall national interest, then you could call into question whether government should be owning businesses. But that's a separate issue. So long as Coal India is a government company, I think Coal India is duty bound to ensure that a larger sector of the economy, the power sector, is well served. So again, I'm not an expert on either power or coal, so I don't want to comment on details, but I think it's imperative that we solve the issue of acute shortage of power as soon as possible. And we need to solve other industry problems. Aviation is not doing too well. Real estate is not doing too well. Again, permissions are very slow. Land availability has difficulties. There are too many permissions involved. So each industry, if we've asked the government that 50 major projects and say 20 major industries which have some serious problems, let's industry and government sit down, get into the details and resolve it across the table. There are many other industries. For example, one of the industries we operate in, FMCG, we don't see any problems. We don't think government needs to do anything very separate. There are some minor issues here, there, etc., which can be resolved. But
Mr. Godrej, you raised the issue of FDI in aviation as this being a priority for the government. But if I were to ask you, I mean, it's stuck because there are lobbies within the aviation sector. One lobby wants the government to open up, the other lobby wants the government to stay closed. The government seems to be caught between which lobby it wants to pander to at this point in time. So if the government is not thinking about the country, neither is corporate India. It is self-interest, isn't it?
Well, one shouldn't pander to any lobby. one should take independent advice on a business, and CII is in a very good position to give independent advice to government on various industries.
How independent is advice really, Mr. Godrej?
Yes, it can be very independent, because we also have our councils in which various views are expressed, and then a decision is taken as to what would be good for the economy.
Is corporate India also guilty of holding up policy decisions that would be good for the country because of self-interest, whether it is gas, whether it is aviation? Corporate India has come in the way of policy decisions being taken.
Yeah, and they shouldn't. So I'm not saying that every member of corporate India has behaved perfectly. By and large, corporate India has been very disciplined, and if there are any segments in corporate India which go for more for their individual interests than the national interest, that should be ignored, in my view.
All right, let's hope that perception improves and reality improves and the two are more aligned and less disconnected.
Absolutely.
Adi Godrej, we wish you the very best of luck. I suspect you're going to need plenty of it. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18.
Thank you.
With that, it is time for us to wrap up the appointment. We'll see you next week. Till then, from the entire team, goodbye and thanks for watching.